Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Wolf Theiss, The Future of series. I'm Anca Jurcovan, and I'm a partner with Wolf Theiss Bucharest, Romania. And together with my partner, Georg Kresbach, who is the partner and head of IP and TNT practice group, we will host this webinar. Throughout the Future of series, we are looking at a wide variety of disruptive technologies and innovation in different industry sectors, together with leading experts in the areas of business, law, and technology. We explore current developments and future trends shaping the markets of tomorrow and influencing modern society.
Many thanks, Anca, for your nice introduction. Well, our today's topic is the future of communication. In the last 2 decades, we have seen significant changes in the way we communicate. At the beginning of this development were email and mobile phone. Both are now indispensable. The continued development of technology will bring further structural changes in the coming years. The pandemic has given this development another boost on the top. And it is not wrong to say that these changes will touch every one of us.
So we are inviting you to this imagination exercise together with our speakers, and we will try to imagine how the future of communication may look like. We will examine the role of social media, which is everywhere, freedom of online communications, and the future of traditional media. We will also look into how communication with customers and colleagues are evolving. And finally, we will discuss what place machines, artificial intelligence, and quantum internet may take in our interactions with each other.
But before we jump into today's session, there are 3 housekeeping rules to remember. First, each speaker is asked to limit his or her speech to 5 minutes. Play a virtual timeline, counting backwards and indicating when the time is up. Second, the Q&A session will take place at the end of the webinar, after we have heard all the presentations. However, we invite you to submit your questions via our chat function at any time. And third, everyone please mute now. Anca, I shall hand over it to you to present our first speaker.
I am definitely happy to introduce our first speaker, who is Veit Dengler, who will talk on the topic of social media as dystopia. Why do we need to protect public discourse? Veit is Chief Operating Officer at Bauer Media Group and has over 15 years of experience in the media and technology sectors. Veit, I can't wait to see hear your speech.
Thank you, Anca. Georg, I think I'm allowed to unmute now, right? According to the rules. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to start with the internet in the 1990s. Some of you may remember how we thought of the internet and how we celebrated it, that it would help us to bring about what some called ultimate democracy. I think Al Gore called it that the internet will introduce an Athenian age of democracy. Well, I think it's fair to say that it didn't quite work out that way. I think what we've seen now with the rise of social media, that we have a much higher level of aggressiveness in our political discourse. I think they have undoubtedly played a strong role in the rise of nationalist, maybe even xenophobic political parties across many democracies. They have contributed a lot to the polarization of society in general, where the person who lives with me but has another opinion is a bigger enemy or a bigger threat than maybe many other people living elsewhere. And also potentially enabled bad players to, for example, tamper with elections, right? Now, the risk is that if these trends continue, that we are heading for perhaps even the demise of public political discourse. Now, you may say that's a bit alarmist, but I think sort of there's a couple of trends in those directions, and we don't see necessarily a strong counter trend. Now, of course, many of these trends predate the internet. But I think what is new is that because the medium is available to anybody, with global reach, potentially. The internet and social media allows us to undermine rules of discourse that we've developed to regulate our political discourse, right? The way we talk to each other as a society. And discourse only works when we have rules, right? Now, Georg introduced by saying, here's the 3 rules of how we're going to work together. And one of the rules is that now you let me talk for 5 minutes and then somebody else talks for 5 minutes. Those are typical rules of discourse. And we need them in a society. We need them in democracy to make democracy work. So I think one of the key questions is, how can we apply the rules of discourse that we have developed over centuries to the social media space? Now, the first one, I'm going to make 3 quick proposals. The first one is a relatively tactical one, but I think an important one, which is user accounts. There's a lot of discussion about whether user accounts should be anonymous or not. And there may be some good arguments by saying that sort of weaker players in society have a ability to congregate and exchange each other, exchange with each other with the protection of anonymity. And I think there's some merit to this argument. But of course, it's in a much bigger way true for people who have bad intentions, for criminal content, for criminal activities. And so I think what we need to get to is we need to understand that user accounts, for me, are a bit similar to bank accounts. You need to identify yourself. You need to see who you are. And then when those accounts do get blocked, right now we're actually relying on social media companies to block them. I think actually this is something that needs to be much strengthened, and companies should be fined for accounts that they have to block, because they have contributed by the actions of those accounts to degrading the discourse. So that's just to throw out a little bit one provocative. The second one is a very simple one, but it has big implications. Facebook and YouTube and others will go to great length to claim that they are not media companies. And that is very simple. One fact is related to that, which is media companies have rights and obligations that these platforms don't want to have, because it makes their business model more expensive. Now, we've developed over centuries rights of media companies, most importantly, the right of freedom from censorship, and that's important. We've also created with that obligations, for example, libel laws. Now, I think it is really important to put social media companies on an equal footing with traditional media companies. Now, you can't do that one-to-one, and there's a big debate about how you do that, but I think the principle needs to be applied. And then the third one, which is a bit related to that, we really need to rethink our antitrust rules. Now, Google, for example, controls both the buy-side and the sell-side tools for its own marketplace, something which we would never permit in financial markets, but which we do permit for Google. I think that's not sensible. And by the way, old media companies are still regulated as if, 2 television magazines magazines cannot merge because they would control the TV listings market. Now, how relevant is that in our world still? So I think those are the 3 main points. We have to rethink about user accounts and how we punish social media companies for abusing or not controlling user accounts. The second one is to put social media and traditional media on equal legal footing. And the third one is a significant revision of antitrust rules.
Thank you so much, Veit. It was really a brief but very clear statement on social media and future of communication around social media. Now, let's look at the legal perspectives around social media. Adolf Zemann will discuss how my current EU and national legislative measures affect the freedom of online communications. Adi is consultant at Wolf Theiss Vienna office. He has over 10 years of experiences advising on intellectual property, IT, and online business law, with a special focus on liability of social media providers in the context of hate speech matters. Adi, the floor is yours, please.
Good morning, everybody from Vienna, and thank you, Georg, for the nice introduction. Today we are looking at the future of communication from several angles, and I would like to put the focus on legislative developments in Austria and the EU that may have consequences for freedom of communications via online platforms. We have already heard a lot, and I think this is an interesting follow-up from another perspective. Online platforms, in particular social media platforms, allow us to communicate with other persons, not only our relatives, our friends, but in essence, they allow us to communicate with the whole world, with some exceptions. While this has, without doubt, positive effects on freedom of communication. We all have seen the drawbacks that social media may have, and it was already named like spreading of fake news, influencing the outcome of elections, inciting hate, spreading terrorist content, insulting and humiliating other persons, infringing copyrights, and so on, and you name it. And these phenomena and the reactions of the platforms to such, like deplatforming, blocking of content or non-blocking of content, has led in particular in the recent past to several national and also EU-wide initiatives for the regulation of platforms. And some of them raise concerns as regards the freedom of expression, the freedom of communication, as protected by the European Charter of Human Rights, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and national constitutional law. I will just show you two quick examples. One example for an EU initiative is the Article 17 of the DSM directive that has received much more emotional media coverage than EU copyright directive usually get. I will give you an example for a recent headline, very recent headline. European Commission betrays internet users by cravenly introducing huge loophole for copyright companies in upload filter guidance. So what is this about? This provision actually aims at balancing the interests of the platforms on the one side, Google, YouTube, the right holders on the other side, and the users of these platforms. So what does Article 17 say? It says that platforms have to use best efforts to get licenses from the right holders, and where they do not get these licenses because, for example, the right holders do not want their content on the platforms, they have to use best efforts to avoid the upload of content for which right holders have provided information, and to initiate quick take down and stay down measures to keep down content for which they have received notifications. Well, actually that sounds good, so where's the problem? The concern that users have is the following, that this will lead to an increase of use of automated upload filters that will not only filter infringing content, but also quotations, criticism, parodies, satire, caricature, and other forms of communication that are protected by the freedom of communications. While actually Article 17 itself says that this should not happen, these concerns remained, and in fact Poland has initiated an action at the Court of Justice of the European Union to annul certain obligations under Article 17. So we might receive a decision end of the year. Actually, Article 17 should have already been implemented by all member states. In fact, only very few have implemented this provision until now. Neither has Austria done. What Austria has done this year is another law. In Austria, like in other countries, the issue of hate speech in social media is present, and as a reaction, Austria has enacted the communication platforms law. It's the Austrian version of the German NetzDG. And according to such, platforms are obliged to implement takedown regimes that enable the platforms to delete certain infringing content in very short time periods. The Act has several other obligations, and systematic failure with compliance with such obligations leads to fines of up to 10 million euros. As a consequence, also this Act has raised certain concerns that it may foster a tendency of overblocking content, meaning that in case of doubt, such platforms would rather delete content than keep it up, be it for the fear of fines or be it simply for a commercial reasons that it is easier to take something down than to analyze this with attorneys or whatever. So we will see where this will lead. It also raises some concerns as regards conformity with EU law. So these have just been two examples of legislations in social media, of regulating social media. There are many others. On the EU level, there's the terror content regulation and the DSA, the Digital Service Act, in the pipeline. In the UK, the Online Harms Bill. And while all of them have, without doubt, nobler aims and intentions, I think they also may have a certain risk for freedom of communications, and therefore it's important to remain vigilant and to monitor the effects that these regulations will in fact have. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much, Adi, and I hope that we can go further with this topic at the Q&A session, because it's quite interesting. Now we do have another colleague for another legal topic. Our next speaker is Phillip Wrabetz. one of the young generations of Wolf Theiss, who is raising the question whether likes, stars, and fake news, what will the future of online ratings look like? Phillip is an associate at Wolf Theiss, and his areas of specialization include copyright law, technology-related intellectual property matters, and data protection. Phillip, can't wait to hear your speech.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So to start, I think it's fair to say that the economic and social significance of online ratings can hardly be overstated. They determine which movies we watch, which products we buy, where we travel, or in some cases, even which doctors we consult or which attorneys we consult. At the same time, this also means that so-called fake reviews pose a very big and serious risk to anyone who markets their products or services in the digital context. But how are online ratings actually regulated today, and how will we deal with them in the future? This is what I will briefly touch upon in the coming minutes. Today, from a legal standpoint, descriptive online ratings with a lot of text by an identified person using his or her real name hardly provide any specific difficulty. Such reviews are treated in the same way as other forms of communication. Adi has already briefly touched upon various legislative acts that regulate this form of speech. So in the interest of time, I will not go into detail here. But what about anonymous reviews, particularly such that only consist of giving 1 star out of 5 possible stars without further comment or context? This is a very common form of online reviews, and it poses difficulties for companies how to deal with such negative comments. Such ratings still operate somewhat in a legal gray area. From the case law of the German Federal Court and the Austrian Supreme Court, it can be inferred that such ratings constitute subjective value judgments and are thus generally protected free speech. At least in Austria, however, it is not entirely clear whether such value judgments are protected and permissible only if they're based on an actual customer experience, like the German Federal Court suggests, or whether such ratings may be placed for a variety of reasons. For example, when a person witnesses media coverage about a company or gets information from third-party accounts, whether it is still permissible to express an opinion with a 1-star review. It is currently equally unclear and assessed differently by German and Austrian courts to which extent platforms may be obligated to verify the authenticity of customer reviews, or at least take some investigative steps to investigate the authenticity of such a rating, of such a review, upon receiving a notice from a claimant. So on the topic of these anonymous online ratings, key legal questions still remain unsolved today, which brings us to the future, of course. With the new so-called Omnibus Directive, the EU has for the first time introduced concrete rules specifically targeted at online ratings and rating platforms. This directive will have to be transposed into national member state law by November 2021 and will apply from May 2022. So it's really an upcoming on the agenda. And while this new law is careful not to impose general monitoring obligations and filtering obligations regarding online rating, it certainly increases the burden on rating platforms to verify the authenticity of user ratings. In particular, the law stipulates that if a company claims that reviews of a product are actually submitted by consumers who have purchased the product, so the review is by an actual customer, it has to undertake reasonable and proportionate steps to verify that fact. Otherwise, the company would be committing an act of unfair competition. So the law already introduces some sort of legal duty of care for the company to investigate the source of the online rating. Moreover, rating platform operators will be subject to new transparency obligations, in particular to inform users if and how they they undertake verification processes to verify the authenticity of online reviews. So users and consumers will have to be informed about that in detail in the future. So effectively, platform operators will have to label whether a review stems from a verified customer or who has actually purchased the product or service in the future, or from a non-verified customer for which the company may make no representation of authenticity. Certainly, the hope and intention of this directive is to increase the level of transparency, and that this will also gradually result in a shift in consumer perception to rely more on verified content, while unverified anonymous ratings will lose significance and therefore also their harm potential. I think I'm running out of time. Is that correct?
You're right, Phillip. Thanks.
Yes. I'm basically finished, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Phillip. Gives us an optimistic outlook for the future. Yeah, but Phillip has spoken about social media from a legal perspective, but what about traditional media? I'm happy to present and introduce our next speaker, Naomi Hunt. She will analyze what does sustainability mean for the media. Naomi is head of transformation at ProSiebenSat.1 Austria. She works on sustainable transformation, storytelling, and communication. Please, Naomi, go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. On the topic of traditional media, that's a huge topic. On the consumer side, there's a lot. The future and even the present means streaming, social interactions, snackable content, user-generated content, audio, gamification, video games, AR, VR. On the advertising side, it's equally complex. The market is shaped by data collection, privacy, targeting, linking various digital worlds. And there's a lot to say about all of that, but I would like to think about sustainability and the role of media, and also creating a sustainable future for the media. Sustainability means the ability to exist constantly. That's good. We want more. We want humanity to thrive in the long term. We live on spaceship Earth, and it's a small place. And if we didn't learn it from the financial crisis, the wars in the Middle East, the refugee crisis, or the climate crisis, we've learned it from the pandemic. We are all connected. We are stuck with each other. What does that mean for the media, in particular for the news? I think it means that news has to offer a view that is broader than its market. For our species to thrive on a flourishing planet with enough food and water and democracy and peace and education and equal opportunity, we need everybody, individuals and leaders in politics and business, to have a perspective wider than their markets. We have to think beyond our borders and beyond our next earnings reports. Obviously, the media has a role to play in shaping that consciousness. Another thing we learned from the pandemic and all of these other crises is that disinformation, politicization, and polarization on social media, for instance, thank you, Veit, are possible even on the most scientific of topics, whether it's climate change or the pandemic. So not all the noise is useful. We need media with a broad view and high quality. What high quality means is subjective, and that's why we need media diversity. Here in Austria, we have a relatively small market, lots of media, which is a good thing, and a trend of advertising budgets shifting to Silicon Valley giants. So like us, most media rely on advertising revenue or subscriptions or some combination thereof. And obviously, what that potential is limited by the size of your market. We have a challenge, though, because high quality content is expensive. So if your company should and does take a global perspective, competes with global players in terms of new technologies and content, we have a challenge. Tech investments are disproportionately expensive for us, and so is high quality content. Our company is currently in the process of developing information and entertainment formats that should be about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals without necessarily saying that they're about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And getting good TV ratings with content about something like the 17 SDGs is a challenge. We need to interest the public in things that are in the public interest, and that's expensive. So how do we create a sustainable landscape of diverse, high-quality media right here in Austria? public funding through license fees is one way, and those go to the public broadcaster ORF, which is fantastic. That model works very well in a lot of the Western world, and we're glad it exists and that they're so excellent, but that's just one player. What about how do we fund public value from those of us in the private sector? There is government direct support. We know all about that. It's hugely welcome, but it's often coupled with very understandable questions about what that does to media independence. Our company believes the solution is to form alliances. We see no other way out. On a technological level, we have to work with each other on ad technologies, on platform development, on solving data protection and transparency issues, and on offering tailored content and advertising. And we think that's the only way that media here in Austria can continue to compete with each other, also against Silicon Valley. Another solution has to be regulatory, as I think others have spoken and will speak about. We need enforceable rules at a European and national level that create transparency, protect data ownership, and crucially sort of level the playing field such that companies who create jobs and value in this environment and pay taxes are not disadvantaged versus the international players. So we won't meet the 17 Sustainable Development Goals unless all of us find sustainable business models in all of our industries, including media. We're a business, just like many of you are. We have to sink our emissions, reduce our negative impact, and stay profitable at the same time. In the year 2100, all of us might sit around and consume media in 3-second chunks versus a projection through a chip that's embedded in our brains. And maybe we will also live on Mars. But if we want human life to continue to be pleasurable and better than it is for a lot of people right now, we have to act. And the greatest open question for me is, and I hope someone would like to talk about this and have some answers, how do we make society invest in and want what it needs? How do we make people want what they need? And that is a question that is as true for quality media as it is for sustainability overall. Thank you.
I hope this is not an attempt of the freedom of speech. So thank you very much, Naomi. For me as a competition lawyer, I could not be more enchanted about the idea of collaborating while competing. So if you think that's a solution, definitely it should be exploited. Now we move to the next speaker who will look into marketing communications. Ina Poljak will now talk about how can we overcome the generational gap in brand communication. Ina is communication psychologist at Behave, a behavioral science agency. She helps brands to adjust their communication to the context and the psychology of customers. Ina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anca. As a communication psychologist, I work with many brands from these different industries, helping them adjust their communication to the age we live in. I'm also a millennial and a technology lover, but you don't have to be either of these things, a psychologist, millennial, nor tech nerd, to notice the generational gap in such communication. It's actually quite easy to spot that brands are often like dinosaurs. Huge, loud, and living only in the good old days. Not all of them, of course, but ones that don't understand what is happening. And what is happening is so fast and intense that even a millennial like me have trouble to stay updated. For example, when I have to create communication materials for Gen Z, I often feel like I don't know how to speak their language. I have to actually be in touch with these people and check everything with them. The language, the relevance of communication to them, the coolness factor. Don't say to them that I use the word coolness, please. So I empathize with brands and all the people doing hard work communicating with different generations. It's not easy. But there is a way to make it easier, and I'd like to share it with you. I call it back to basics. And what the basics are? The basics are being focused not on our generational differences, but on what we have in common. And we often forget about that. The first and the most important thing we have in common is that we are humans. We are social beings with the same psychological needs. A need to belong, a need to blend in our social group, and to be different and unique in comparison with other groups. We need a sense of identity. The second thing we have in common is how our brain works. and is basically unchanged from the time we lived in caves. What helped us crawl from these caves and build a civilization is understanding and trusting others, being able to feel what they feel and know how to respond. Today we call it empathy, and it's a powerful force wired in the brain of most of us. It's not some complicated skill we need to learn how to use. It's natural to us. The third thing we have in common is that we like to be heard and respected. We like to know that somebody cares for us and wants to be there for us. This is especially important for brands. How much they care for their customers, how they show their care and empathy is what matters the most, no matter if you speak to boomers, millennials, Gen Z, or Alpha generation. As for empathic communication, you may wonder, what does it mean? For example, it can mean that we adjust our communication to customers. We, as brands, shouldn't be speaking about ourselves, how great and awesome we are. Instead, we tell them how we can help them, how can we make their life easier or solve some of their problems. We show them our relevance within their life and their story, not the other way around. We also explain to them everything they should know. We don't use our professional jargon and uncommon abbreviations. We use the language they will understand, and this is one of the ways that we show that we care. If we focus on what we have in common, then the generational gap will only be a cosmetic problem. The only relevant questions would be, should I say vibe or energy, or should I post on TikTok or Instagram? It's important, of course, but that's not all that matters. As I said in the beginning, times changes rapidly, and they will continue to change. It's always been like that. Only now, everything is faster thanks to technology and globalization. And we can embrace these changes by focusing on how to truly stay in touch. It's the biggest challenge for brands, how to maintain real contact and implement what I defined as basics into their communication. As for generational gaps, they will always exist. I'd like to finish with one quote. It goes like this. Children, they have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents and tyrannize their teachers. Children are now tyrants. This was said by Socrates about 4 centuries BC. As you see, nothing really changed. The generational gap is a constant, but it doesn't have to be a real obstacle. It's upon all of us. Are we going to focus on what drives us apart or on what all of us have in common, being humans with the need to be approached with empathy? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ina. That was really an amazing presentation. We have heard that communication is also the art of making oneself understood between different generations. I really liked your quote from Socrates. I've learned a lot. Yes, let's see what is happening with professional communications now at work. What do we expect will change? Our next speaker, Olivia Stiedl, will talk about how will we communicate in the hybrid world of work. Olivia is partner at PwC Austria and leads the People and Organization Department. She supports her clients in complex challenges related to international workforce, managing risks in human resources, and driving digital transformation. Please, Olivia, go ahead.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, and I think I will take over with a topic where we see a lot of changes around. And the working world as of today, I would say it's really a combination. Hybrid working is the word of the day, and it's not only remote working plus on-site working, but the term hybrid working means really a complete change of how we are interacting with each other at the workplace. And in practice, all the communication models which have been in place with company over the, I would say, last 10 to 15 years, they need to change as well. And there needs a change to be at the level of the leaders as well as of the employees. And whenever there is change, of course, there is uncertainty. There are people which are afraid to go with that. And there is a huge chance as well, and this is the topic where I want to look into in my 5 minutes here now. So what does the working world require from people? They require to be available. It requires to reach each other. And there the first problem with the hybrid working world jumps in. So while in former days you just found colleagues for informal chat in the coffee area, you can't do that anymore. While you had difficult conversations in a physical setting, you can't set conversations like that up anymore. And the hybrid working also means for a lot of companies that they are not hiring local people. They are hiring more and more people working all over the world, and we see that also matrix organization models support that thinking. So it's not only that the people are not in the physical same area, but they are over different time zones, and of course also cultural gaps might become larger and larger. So people are working anywhere and at any time, as I like to say. And what does it mean for teams? They need a different setup how they can reach each other. They need a different setup how they document their decisions, so that also people which might not have participated in a conversation can find that easily and also can understand how the team reached a certain decision. So it means that the responsibility of the own employee for tasks is getting really higher and higher. And this is very different from a working world where there were more instructions, where a more hierarchical structure was given from the company. And the challenges in this connection, I would say they can partly be tackled with technology. So we all know the nice video calling systems we have. There are cooperation tools where you can work with each other on the same document. But do you find these documents at a different point in time? Do you have a good structure in your company to ensure that after 5 or 6 years, when there might be also a change in the people responsible to the project, because we are working agile nowadays, that these docs will be fine again? So you see, there is a structure needed, and we have a lot of clients which say, okay, I'm not sure how to manage that. And it's a question which is not being raised that often. For me, it's also about taking care about teams. When we say working anywhere and at any times, it means for a lot of people handling different time zones by splitting working time up and even working more hours than they did before. So it's really becoming much more important than in the past to draw these boundaries, to really block times where you're not available for conversations and working with the team, and to have open conversations about that, transparency. And also the requirement of transparency is really posed to leaders for all conversations they are having. So, conclusio, so many topics, so many issues we still have to work on, but I think it's a big change possible. We can change habits. It's important to put the effort in it, but there is a great chance that we will be able to be more flexible, to bring more people into the workforce, be it people who cannot work full time, be it people which really live at a very remote area, or also be it people with a disability who might not be able to really be at the physical workplace every day. Secondly, it's really important to find ways for informal conversations. So bring back the, let's say, coffee corner conversations, and to not forget about that. And lastly, the formal communication needs to be structured in a way so it can be reached by everybody and also can be found after 5 to 10 years. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Olivia. We definitely miss our coffee corner conversations, but technology still facilitated good working from home, which is very linked to the next topic related to technology, which definitely makes our communication easier. Our next speaker is Clemens Geyer, who will look into how can artificial intelligence make virtual meetings great again. Clemens is a technical solution architect at Cisco. His areas of expertise include IP telephony, webinars, video conferencing, contact centers, as well as related privacy and security aspects. Clemens, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, American motivational speaker Jim Rohn once said, effective communication is 20% of what you know and 80% how you feel about what you know. And I would rather adapt that quote and say 80% of communication is how you feel when you present, when you communicate. Just think when you're sick or when you're presenting of an audience you're not familiar with, you're nervous, it really has an influence how effective the communication is. And now applying that to virtual meetings, which we were all faced about 1 year ago for the first time, we were more focusing on the technical obstacles, finding the proper microphone, selecting the right camera, and it really had an influence on how we communicated. So the industry, the web conferencing industry, is now looking for solutions on integrating artificial intelligence into meeting solutions which make our lives easier to bring back the human factor into virtual meetings. What is artificial intelligence? It's a buzzword, obviously. The difference to traditional algorithms is that in traditional algorithms, it works like a mathematical formula. So basically, you provide input, then there are some calculations, then you have output. With artificial intelligence, we're using either statistical data or we're using so-called deep dive learning algorithms, which work similarly to the human brain in order to fulfill tasks similar to humans. Now, a couple of practical examples, real-life examples. We all know the meeting where you have background noise. So you have a drilling machine, you have the crying baby, a barking dog, the vacuum cleaner. With artificial intelligence, you can filter out that. You can even go one step further. Think about you in your home office, sharing the room with your partner, with your kids, and they're also on a call. Yeah, obviously, you want to filter out that side conversation. It doesn't have anything to do with your meeting. Another interesting aspect is image processing. So think about a virtual classroom. What's the most natural thing a teacher will ask the student if they have a question? They will do the same like in a real classroom, they will raise their hand. Yes, in virtual meetings, you have a button to press that, but now we even have the option of doing some artificial intelligence and recognize that somebody has raised his or her hand, and it will send a notification to the moderator and tell them, look, there's a question which should be answered. Our next application example is language processing. So think about the fact that in former times we always assign somebody who is responsible for taking notes, taking meeting minutes, and so on. That's not really necessary anymore. You can do speech recognition, you can have live subtitles in a call, you can automatically save them, can even take the subtitles, the spoken word, send it over to a translation solution, and every participant can select their mother tongue or their preferred language, so you don't need to hire professional interpreters just for the purpose of having a quick workaround and translate all the spoken words. You can even take that and send out summaries to the participants and the highlights of the solution of the meeting. You can integrate the spoken word with external booking tools. So for example, you can say, virtual assistant, please set up a real life meeting in 1 week in Prague and invite person ABC, book a hotel room and book the flight, and it will be automatically done without anybody needing to get the hand dirty. So these were just a couple of examples which show you how we can bring in the human factor and really focus on the communication and not so much on the technology which is behind. It was just a glimpse what is possible today. Future is really bright. I'm curious what other innovations will come soon. And with that, I'm only waiting for my virtual assistant to tell me that my time is over. Thank you.
Thanks, Clemens. Sounds really promising. Can't wait for the next Zoom meeting. I wonder what if one day we won't need a human in communications at all. Maybe our next speaker can give us the answer. Clemens Wasner will focus on our workspace in 2030. Will machines talk to machines? Clemens is founder and CEO of Enlight AI, which specializes in applied reinforcement learning. He's also a founder and chairperson of AI Austria, a think tank promoting artificial intelligence. Clemens organizes the Applied Artificial Intelligence Conference and is an active member of the European AI Forum. Please, Clemens, have a go.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here today. And yeah, looking forward to my 5 minutes of Wolf Theiss fame. Before I get started, maybe one very important disclaimer, because I know machine-to-machine communication has many different meanings. So when I talk about machine-to-machine communication, I mean a communication format that is understandable for humans. So let's say text, images, video, or so on. I don't mean some protocols like IoT. So it's not about your refrigerator talking to your muesli bowl that you will be late for work, for example. So now, before I dive into what AI is actually doing in the communication mix or what is expected in the future, I want to give just a brief look back how the technology we use always had an influence on the way what we communicate and how we communicate. So the best example is if you look, for example, how each of us is using SMS. SMS, or short messaging service, is forcing you to put your thoughts in very few characters. And as a result, you communicate on a short form channel very different than you would do on a long form channel. Very interesting are, of course, hybrid formats like email, which still carry over a lot of the legacy from writing letters. So it's still quite long. And for many, I think for most people in the business world, a very tedious process. But still, you could see that the mindset we used for long form text has carried over. And I think since many of the previous speakers mentioned social media, I think this is also very important to point out that when self-censorship strikes in, let's say, composing a very short post on Twitter, which used to be 140 characters and now is 280, it's still the human that has to adapt to the underlying constraints from the technology. So much for the history lesson. When I talk about today and how machines are in the communication mix, basically, I mean two scenarios. The one is where humans talk directly with machines, and the other one is where machines, or let's say AI systems, work as the intermediary. So I think when starting with human to machine communication, the most prominent example, although I would, if I had to guess, most people don't perceive it even like that. The most prominent example is the Google search box. Take today's event as an example. If you would type in Wolf Theiss Future of Communication event, or when is the next big Wolf Theiss event happening, Google will definitely not show you any usable result. So over the past 20 years, we humans learned to adapt to like the constraints that the machine is giving us. And as such, we use a very restricted way of writing. I always call this caveman English, which is, of course, not the correct scientific term, but you know what I mean. Where this is even more extreme is if you look at, let's say, chatbots. In a chatbot, from the beginning, our expectation is so low that we just start to ask very simple questions and also expect very simple answers. I think the more interesting scenario is if we have humans as machines as intermediaries. Be it spam filters is a very good example. If you write to someone that you never had contact with before, you, to a certain degree, you have to be careful not to use certain signal words, so it's not classified as spam, and the human will never see it. Since brand advertising was mentioned today specifically, I think an area where this is even more prevalent is everything related to search engine optimization or content. Because here, although the human is the end customer, you still have to write it in the way that it will pass through, let's say, the Instagram or Facebook algorithm or through the LinkedIn or Google algorithm. So to a certain way, you already have humans here optimizing for an AI referee in the middle. And where it now gets very extreme, or let's say, if you think this to the end, we are currently at the beginning of a movement where AI is able to also generate content. Most famous example is deepfakes, but this is also now happening in text. For text, we are in the early innings where, let's say, basic headlines or Instagram posts can be written, but progress is very fast, and it's already happening now to longer content. So let's say LinkedIn posts, which have 1,350 character limit. And if you think this, let's say 5 years or 10 years down the road, it's absolutely realistic that you end up in a scenario where content is created by a machine and optimized so that the intermediary, the sorting and ranking algorithm will make sure it passes through to a human. So yeah, with that, looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Clemens. Somehow it looks like you're talking about the present, but for many of us it's science fiction anyway. So the next speaker is Romeo Milea, who is looking at how the evolution of technology shaped the future of communication. Romeo is Director of Network Development Technology Enterprise Solutions at Vodafone Romania. He has over 2 decades of experience in strategic and background operations in the IT&C sector. He's very passionate about technology innovation that challenges people's lives and is interested in business models for cutting-edge technology. Romeo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anca, for introduction. Today I'll talk about a little bit of how communication was influenced by technology, and definitely how technology will influence the communication in the future. Now, going a little bit back 200 years ago, how communications looked like between two persons at a very high distance. It was mainly sending a letter, writing a letter, then sending the letter with post chase powered by horses, waiting a couple of days or weeks to arrive the letter, and then the receiver will write down the answer, and then the answer will come back via again days and weeks, and finally you close the loop of communication. So how we communicate today? This webinar, it's something magic. We can communicate real time by audio and video. This is also due to the evolution of technology. And I want to point out 2 areas of what means technology as a driver for improving communications. One is the how fast the information is going from one point to another. And the other, it's how much volume we can send from a point to another point, distant point. When the technology gives the opportunity to send faster the information, then we start to talk about via phones in a different part of the world. Then when we put a little bit more quantity of informations to be able to send, the video call started. And then with the evolution of different other technologies, we were able to broadcast, to have real-time video, and so on. Now, why is this thing important? Now, looking to our brains and how we see the world, how we see the reality, actually the brain is receiving informations. This means sort of communication with the world via the common 5 senses. And I'll talk about eyes, our eyes. So the eyes our eyes is receiving the information by looking to an object. So the light will come in the eye, and then going to optical nerve in the brain, it takes some time. We think this is real time for us, but actually it's about tens of milliseconds. Tens of milliseconds means mainly that we are living in the past with tens of milliseconds. But for us, for human, this is real time. I mean, this is how we perceive the reality. And via different other sense that we have, smelling, hearing, will be even worse in terms of real time. So now with the 5G introduction and the new technology in how fast we communicate, this will open a floor to low latency. This means faster than our eye can see an image, and very high level of quantity of information. So then the question is why we need this? Because this is more than we can process in terms of communication. And definitely also the previous speakers talk about the machine-to-machine communication may be the next area where we can take a look in how the communication will improve our lives. Imagine that in the future, with the self-driving cars that are able to communicate between them and with the traffic lights and the different sensors that we put near the roads. So the car will be much faster in reaction comparing with you sitting in and driving the car. Yeah. So actually, this will improve a lot our lives. So it's not only how the communication will improve, but also how we interaction and mainly communication will improve our lives. Now, this 5G will introduce mainly low latency delays. This means 10 times faster than the eye can process, can see the information. Yeah, but this is, I mean, the last frontier. What is next? And I think for me, in a couple of tens of years, I will not put any figures here. With the power of quantum computing, we may be able to talk between us directly between our brains. So the brain-to-brain communication, telepathy, teleportation, I think will be the future somehow. Maybe not our lifetime, but for sure our children's, we may see this. So I think the future of communication sounds amazing, at least for me. We need to be prepared from the psychological point of view and also to have a good legal environment in order to be able to be comfortable that nobody will hack our brain. Thank you.
Thanks, Romeo. I will try to use teleportation. And that was really interesting presentation. I think we should, in any case, make sure that it serves us the way we wanted to do it, the new technologies and the possibilities where you were speaking about. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, our webinar is now coming to an end. Last but not least, I am happy to introduce our last speaker for the day, Anca Jurcovan. Anca will revert to a legal topic and she will talk about how will regulation secure trust in new communication technologies. Anca is a partner at Wolf Theiss Bucharest office and a coordinator of the Regulatory and Competition Practice Group in Romania. She advises media and telecom players as well as platforms and e-commerce companies. Anca, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Georg. So going back to everything that has been said in the previous speeches, we can actually we can draw this conclusion that the adoption of new communication technologies is very much based on trust. Romeo was telling about the adoption of self-driving cars, which are much faster than humans, can actually predict the the situation on the road. But if you look at the level of trust in this new technology, you can actually see that only around 25% of the European citizens would actually embrace this new technology as we speak. So my topic is about how can regulation secure the trust needed for faster technology adoption and for reaping up the benefits of innovation. Like in human-to-human communication, we initiate and we are part of the meaningful conversation if we do trust our partner at the other end, as well as if we trust the communication channel, meaning the messenger or the carrier. Trusting the partner at the other end is a lot about how you are able to read him and understand what he will do with the message or data you share. Also, it at the other end is a self-learning machine. You need to understand how your artificial intelligent partner has been trained, what are his biases and real intentions. Now, concerns on mass survey and systemic remote biometric identification or any subliminal techniques that would make humans do something they don't want to do undermines trust. And we can see a lot of regulatory efforts in actually providing a clear statement that those type of the conducts are not what we want in our society, at least in Europe. Secondly, you need to trust the carrier of the message. Your message data should be safe in the hands of the messenger and safely passed to the interlocutor. Romeo had listed the possible next generation connectivity solutions, which open up a world full of opportunities. Some will lead definitely to new, richer communication experience that enables us to touch, move, and perhaps even smell at a distance. They all should come with the proposition of trust on behalf of the industry promoting those technology, but also on behalf of the regulators. When the first telesurgical operation was made almost 20 years ago by a team of French surgeons located in New York on a patient in Strasbourg, so nearly 6,000 kilometers away, by using telecommunication solutions based on high-speed services, trust was the key at that experiment, which actually led to a larger scale use of this technology. This fantastic development could not have occurred without the full trust of the patient, which probably didn't rely only on the likes of those specific doctor, but heavily relied on the underlying connectivity infrastructure that facilitated the operation. Trusting the connectivity solution is tackled mainly from a twofold perspective. You need to trust that the communication channel does not let you down when you need it most. For instance, during a distance surgical operation. And the pandemic showed that the telcos are doing their job quite impressively. But also that is not hijacked in favor of the third party. So Romeo was talking about hijacking our brains. Here, cybersecurity solutions make up the top agenda of major corporations and also the regulators. One of the main questions that arises is who controls the nuclear button of data and communication and infrastructure. Against this background, the question is, how can regulation make its own proposition of trust? And also, does it or even will it ever keep the pace with innovation? The answer is definitely not straightforward. There are definitely attempts to keep the pace. But it should be directed also, we should also look into how much regulation we need to secure trust. We are witnessing a race to regulate big tech after some decades of permissionless innovation, and cybersecurity, again, friends, are top of the agenda. The problem with traditional regulation might be that it's often reactive to market failures and rather slow in adopting new products, services, or new business model. So could regulation be more proactive or anticipatory? Georg, you'll have to bear with me since I'm the last speaker. another question is, due to the fact that regulators are currently much out of their comfort zone, and they're trying to come up with solutions and regulate. What are the type of regulation that would be fitted for the current technology? Does it mean that regulators should engage themselves in some form of experimental regulation in parallel with the product R&D while the new technologies are in their early development phase? It might actually be a very good idea, and I'm happy to see that the anticipatory regulation via the organization of regulatory sandbox is actually pushed by the current draft of the Artificial Intelligence Act as a measure to support innovation. Regulatory sandboxes are tools which enable that innovative policies and also innovative technologies can be tested in a real-life setting. Such legal experiments temporarily create free zones where waivers from the existing regulation applied or parallel regulation enacting new and different rules are applied on a limited amount of time. We have recent example of testing self-driving cars, drones, or various artificial intelligence algorithms in living labs projects where consumers test the products and regulators have a real life opportunity to observe, collect evidence, and test the underlying rules. Will this new tool contribute to the future of timely regulation and bring more trust in technology? I will leave that question for you. Definitely, this is the future is promising as those type of regulatory sandboxes are seen and are becoming more and more popular. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anca. And I would like to thank all of our speakers of today. We have heard all presentations now, and we will now move to the Q&A session. If you haven't done so yet, you can now submit questions via the chat function. Looking at the chat box, I already see some very interesting questions. I would suggest to start with the following question, going, I guess, to a lawyer. It's a rather legal question. I would ask Phillip, forward this question to Phillip. Phillip, are you still in?
Yes, of course.
Shall I read the question? Yes. Or do you read the question for the audience?
Okay, of course. So the question is, I understand that online reviews shall be monitored whether they come from real customer or not. How about platforms listing healthcare professionals and reviews, for example, doctors? How can it be verified whether a reviewer is really a patient? Is this feasible at all, given that this is a sensitive data? Yes, and this is, of course, a very good question, and it touches right at the core of this debate. The balance between the privacy rights of the reviewer and then, of course, the economic and professional interest of the reviewed person. Specifically on the issue of healthcare, of platforms that list healthcare professionals, the German Federal Court has issued a number of decisions and basically also confirmed that in Germany the rating provider has to undertake reasonable efforts to verify the identity. And in a similar fashion, the new Omnibus Directive states that if a company claims that reviews are authentic, it has to also take reasonable and proportionate steps to ensure that this is actually accurate. Now, to your concrete question, whether this is feasible in the context of health data, this is, of course, a very, very difficult scenario that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But in general, it could be attempted, and that was the case in the German proceedings, to find proof that does not entail the processing of any sensitive data. So, for example, a scheduled appointment or a confirmation, appointment confirmation, or email correspondence that does not itself contain sensitive data, but proves that the person is a patient. In Austria, there's not yet any case law on this specifically, and as mentioned at the beginning, this is really at the heart and at the core of the issue, and always a point of debate.
Great, thanks, Phillip. The next question goes to Naomi. Naomi, you're still on the scene?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have the question in front, or should I read it?
I can read it. I can read it.
Yes,
on your point that we need to think how we can make people want what they need, how could we make people prefer high quality verified content, which may contradict their views, to social media groups which deliver messages people want to hear? Will media efforts be sufficient, or do we need support from the education system, for example? Well, what a good question if we had the answer. Now, I think that people obviously have a strong emotional preference for worldview confirmation, and that's why social media has been just smashing success. But the answer is media literacy, and I think that is, yes, we absolutely need the support of the education system. I wish that even my very young children who are learning media literacy in school would understand, and that people would understand what goes into the news-making process at a serious media outlet, versus how opinions are generated on Twitter. That would be key information. And as a media company, I think that we also obviously have a role to educate people in that, and that the best place to do it might not be the news. I think we should have entertaining, fun formats that people want to watch, that at the same time serve the purpose of underscoring what is relevant and what is factual. I hope that answers the question.
Excellent, Naomi. Thank you. I fully share your view that as communication starts at home, that's the place where you have to learn the communication, and we cannot overestimate education at all in a very broad meaning, broad sense. No, I'm really sure that no technology will substitute education for humans. Good. Then we still have time for another question to Ina. Ina is still with us? Yeah, great. Yeah. Can you please read the question and briefly answer, or take the time you need for answering?
Yeah, okay, I will. My question is, you talked about understanding our identities. Do you think that technology changes our sense of identity? We know how powerful technology is. So I believe that technology influences our sense of identity. In one hand, it can amplify everything we recognize as parts of our identity, groups we belong to, our attitudes, values, and so on. By finding people similar to us, we are strengthening that sense. On the other hand, it allows us to get in touch with different people all around the globe, different cultures, different lifestyles. So it gives an opportunity to meet and understand many different groups of people. Only a few decades ago, this wasn't even possible. So yes, I would say that technology can both amplify and change our sense of identity.
Thank you. Thank you, Ina. Good. I'm that sorry, but our webinar must come to an end. It was a very big pleasure to have all of you on the panel, and it's my job to hand over to Anca again.
So a big thank you from ourselves to our speakers who had very interesting presentations, and all the participants for sharing your know-how and contributing to our series. If you're interested in further insight into what the future might look like, register to our next event on the future of investing, taking place on September 9th. Thank you very much and have a good day.